Hi, I'm Pat Sloan, and I am thrilled to be here hosting a series of interviews with people who have been part of the Virginia Quilt Museum, making it happen, making it come together for the 25th anniversary. We have to talk about how it all started. And there are several massively influential people. They were not able to be with us for these talks, Joan Knight and Susie Smith. But I have wonderful Heidi Haynes here, who is on the board and is the chair of the 25th anniversary celebration. And Heidi has had the opportunity to talk to them about the museum. And also, Heidi, you are so important right now, being part of the board to keep the museum running as it is. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Pat. I'm happy to be with you today, too.
One of the cool things is that when you joined the board, you have a great interest in history, and you started doing a lot of research into how the museum came to be. And that is why you're perfect to give us this sort of kickoff to the start of the museum. What year did it come up? What month in 1995?
The actual doors opened in August of 1995.
Yeah.
So,
it's so, to get to that step, so many people had to do so many things. It's hard to even, I mean, we could talk for hours, but Joan Knight and Susie Smith were two people that had some ideas, and they shared with you how they kind of ended up being together. Well, how did that happen?
well, let's talk about Joan Knight first, okay? Joan was the director of a group of women who were writing down and documenting the history of quilts made in Virginia, and quilts that were significant to Virginia. And she worked on this project for years and years. And in the last 3 years, she and some of her co-workers traveled throughout the state of Virginia to all the different regions, interviewing families who had these quilt treasures. And a common recurring theme came out of these discussions that she had over those years, and it was that these people were distressed. They had these heirloom quilts, and they were concerned that when they passed on, that at an estate auction or a sale or something, these quilts would just go out to the public and may leave the state and just be gone forever. And so they started talking about how could they keep these quilts in Virginia and document them. And so Joan, out of those conversations, she had an idea for the Quilt Museum. Mm-hmm. At the same time that this was going on, this is the late 80s, early 90s. Yeah. Susie Smith was then the curator of education at Belgrove Plantation. Yeah. And part of Belgrove at the time, they had two quilt guilds that met there. One was a day meeting, one was a night meeting, and they had a small quilt shop. And the quilters that met there had a high interest in having teachers come to the area so they could learn more about quilting. And they started something called the Belgrove Symposium, and it was renowned for its time.
It was wonderful. I went to it. Yeah.
It was wonderful. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it. I did not. And when I found out about it, I was very jealous. Yeah. So at one point, this symposium was grand. They had a quilt show associated with it. They had lectures and classes. And then they had vendor malls. So it was like, one of the early quilt show type things that we have now. As a matter of fact, this symposium is the precursor to the show that we now see on an annual basis in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Yeah. So it was a precursor to that. That's a whole nother story.
Right.
So at one point, they had an exhibit come to this symposium from the New England Quilt Museum. Yeah. And when that exhibit was there, Susie said, we should have this for Virginia quilts. They're so
we should have a museum.
We should have a museum. So I just find it fascinating that these two wonderfully creative and strong women had a similar idea, but from two totally different perspectives.
Yeah.
And then just by happenstance, Joan Knight, who is a quilter and an instructor, was teaching at the symposium. And she and Susie started talking, and Joan said, I think we need a museum here to save these beautiful quilts in Virginia. And Susie went, I have the same idea. So they worked together and started to formulate how to go about building a museum.
One of the mainstays of a museum is a building. So even though there will be lots and lots of work behind the scenes to develop a museum, to get a collection organized, to have a purpose for your museum, you still need a building.
Yes.
And at some point, this team of people, with Joan as the director, needed to find a building. How did it end up being in Harrisonburg?
Well, the original plans were for it to be built as a brand new building at Belgrove Plantation. And they worked for years with that as the goal. And in those early years, they did the articles of incorporation. They became a 501c3 organization. They wrote bylaws. They started the membership program. They even were collecting quilts from people. Yeah. And so they were doing all of the foundation building work. And they kind of got to a time where they stalled. And they consulted with a museum consultant, a person in Richmond. Mm-hmm. And his suggestion was, just get in a storefront like building, a brick and mortar building where you can hang your quilts, you can say, this is our address, and it would help them to generate even stronger interest and to get the museum off and running. So it was a temporary idea. They looked throughout cities in Virginia for someone who was interested in working with them on that. Yeah. And they had three towns along in the Shenandoah Valley: Winchester, Harrisonburg, and Stanton. And Harrisonburg offered the Warren Sipe House as it had just become vacant.
And it is amazing. Yeah, amazing location. And the from what I understand, let's see if I have this right, it's the city manager, Roger Baker, was somebody that this team of people worked with, and he was incredibly supportive in making it happen.
Well, he was. And so the initial agreement with the city was that the museum could locate there it was temporary basis. They looked at it annually, and at a very nominal cost. It was $1 a year was the rent they paid. So that was very enticing. And then the price is right. And as they were getting established, they invited Roger Baker, who was the assistant city manager, to join the board of directors and to work with them as they both cared about this historic home that was right in downtown. And over the course of, I think it took about 5 years, but eventually they said, we either need to find a permanent place or we need to settle here. And the city offered the museum the building itself, and so they turned the deed over after 5 years of being there. And so now we have the deed to the house.
When you were interviewing, by phone, Joan and Susie, there was a lot of stories. And so you and I had talked about some of the things we wanted to share here. And one was how the Virginia Quilt Museum became the official quilt museum of Virginia, that there's actually a status out there, and that the museum board and director and everybody had put in for this status to be the official museum. So, but there is a little backstory to that, right?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. As you can imagine, there's a lot of work that has to go on in the background to have something official like this happen, to contact the representatives and things. So they did all of that background work, and the day finally came when they were told, come to Richmond, come to the Capitol, and you will have to make a pitch for why Virginia should have its own quilt museum. And so Joan tells me that a car full of folks coming from Harrisonburg, so they drive at early morning hours, drive to Richmond to get there. And wouldn't you know it, the schedule had changed and they were no longer on the agenda for that day. And they were told they have to come back next week.
Oh,
And so they were a little disappointed. And
yeah.
they said, well, so as soon as they could, they got on the phone and they started calling all of the quilters across Virginia in all the different regions, says, call your representative,
Right.
tell them how important this is.
Yeah.
And so they were rescheduled for the next week. They get up early again, they go back down, and Joan's all prepared. She's at the podium. She's ready to go into her presentation. And she says, hello, my name is Joan Knight, and I'm from the Virginia Quilt Museum. And the representative said, we know all about the Quilt Museum. We've heard about it from everywhere. You don't need to tell us anymore. We agree. You are the official museum of Virginia. And that was in, I think, the year 20,000, January of 20,000. So,
wow. The power of a quilter.
2000.
That's right.
Yes.
Power of a quilter. Now I wanted to just touch on base on just a couple more things. And one would be like, what was the first quilt that got accepted into the museum?
This one. This story came from Susie Smith.
Yeah.
So Susie, they had started their planning for the museum, and someone contacted them and said, I have a quilt that I'd like to donate. And Susie came to Winchester to meet with Ruth Cohn. And she went, and they had agreed to visit. So she went to Ruth's apartment, and Ruth was in her wheelchair. She was in her 90s. And when Susie went in to see her, she had a pillowcase, a quilt in a white pillowcase draped over her shoulder. Mm-hmm. And they chatted a little bit, got to visit, and she was talking about the quilt. Her mother had made it before she married. I think the quilt was made in 1890, so it was 100 years old at the time Susie is talking with her. Mm-hmm. And the whole time they're chatting, she's sitting there doing this, patting this quilt on her shoulder as if it's a dear loved one. So they finally discussed what the museum was about, how they intended to preserve wonderful quilts like this, and she agreed that she was very happy to let the quilt go to the museum. And it's a wonderful quilt, original design, applique work, and we still have it at the museum, and it is cherished. It's a beautiful quilt.
Now I have to get a chance to see that one. It's like, I don't know that I've seen it or not, but
I got to touch it this summer. We were refolding it and I was like, oh, I got to see it.
That's right. History.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you on a personal level, because you and I are both Virginia quilt makers. We have both been in guilds here in Northern Virginia, and you're probably in one, active with some people where you are now. But when the museum was first getting started, you were president of the Quilters Unlimited Reston chapter, which is also the chapter I was in and president of. But when you were there, what do you remember about the vibe of what was going on about opening our very first museum for quilts in Virginia?
Oh, there was a great deal of excitement and promotion going on. And as you recall, as the member or the president of a chapter, you were also on the board at Quilters Unlimited. Right. So I would go to those meetings where they were very much involved in promoting the museum and fundraising, but also in getting volunteers to come. Right. And the biggest thing I remember is that they would go around to the quilt meetings in the area, and they would take the opportunity quilt that was made. Anna Holland is an original board member at the museum, and she orchestrated about 25 Virginia quilters to make, actually more than 25. There are 25 blocks, but there were maybe 30 quilters who appliqued these blocks. It was an album style quilt. And at the time it was called Belgrove Album Quilt because it was for the museum at Belgrove. Oh, yeah. But it was donated after a guild won the raffle, and it was called the Skyline Quilt Guild in Strasbourg. And as fate would have it, they donated it back to the
Yeah.
museum. So we have it at the museum, and now we call it the Virginia Quilt Museum album quilt, and it is stunning. It's beautiful work. But I remember that coming to our meeting, and they, they would set up a table. They would have time to speak and present, their ideas about the museum, and then sell some tickets to it. So
Yeah, it's such great memories, and it is so fabulous to have the museum here 20, 26 years now since we couldn't do this last year. Yeah,
still important to celebrate it,
it
though.
is.
I find it very interesting that one of the founders, Joan Knight, whose background is history, she majored in history and taught history, that she is now a part of history as being one of the founders of the museum. I think it's a wonderful story.
It is. And I appreciate so much all the research you did and coming here to share with us. We do wish maybe at some point Joan and Susie will be able to do a talk at when it works out for their schedules.
Yeah.
But also I want to thank you for being on the board and for chairing this event and being able to get all this stuff together.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
So thank you so much. And we'll be right back.
Okay.
Hello, friends. This is Pat Sloan here for the Virginia Quilt Museum, and it is the 20th anniversary interviews. I am so thrilled to be able to connect with a few of the directors of the Virginia Quilt Museum so that we can get a little bit of background and some story about what it was like while they were at the museum. And I have Paula Caldwell here. So exciting because Paula, you have had deep history with the museum. You were actually the director during 2010, was it? No, 2008 to 2010. But you were like from day one. What did you tell me? Like when you signed up for everything, like you gave your your money.
I'm kind of known for that, right?
Yes. Yeah. So you became a member in 1997 and like started volunteering right away.
Right away, right.
Yeah. So when you went through different jobs as you were on the board, and so by the time that you were asked or became the director, you had a little bit of knowledge about what was going on with the museum.
Right. Yeah. Both what happens behind the scenes and what happens where the public is. And so, yeah, had some good experiences and good mentoringship from Joan Knight, the first director. Yeah.
Yes. She was amazing. Or, as you pulling all this together, and then all of you that have come since have kept the momentum going. So there's a lot of different things that went on during the time frame when you were the director, and we're going to focus a little bit on those. When you first became director, what was exciting to you about taking on that job?
Ooh, well, it was overwhelming to begin with, but it was exciting to be able to be part of a decision making and part of changes that were coming about. Exciting to be part of growing the museum, not only in terms of membership, but in terms of programs and staff. So a lot was going on during that transition time. Yeah.
One of the big things that you told me about when we chatted prior was the newsletter, because there's always been a newsletter, but at the time that you were there, you were able to institute some big changes. What did you do with the newsletter?
The newsletter, the first one that I was responsible for publishing in the fall of 2008 was our first color edition. And that was pretty,
yeah.
And then from there, we not only did color, but we also, got on board with the trying to email it out and send it out electronically so that we could save precious dollars for other things. And the president of the board at that time, Loretta Spittle, she was really the spearhead behind that. So really appreciate her energy and efforts and vision to do that.
Yeah, that's a big change, because as quilters, seeing something come in color in our mailbox, would have been, and I'm sure I was getting those at that time, would have been very exciting. Let's talk a little bit about the exhibits that went on while you were the director. What was your favorite? I know it's hard. I know I'm going to ask you, what was
It's
your
hard.
favorite?
Yeah, favorite. Yeah.
What was
Well,
one
you know,
that,
the one that always comes to my mind readily was the Heatwell heritage, which was 5 generations of a Mennonite family that lived actually here locally in the area. And that was exciting because it was local. It was also overwhelming because it was my first installation by myself. You know, I've worked with Joan previously. But Barbara Klein, I don't know if you know Barbara or not.
no, Barbara.
Yes, so that is her family.
Yes.
And her grandmother was the matriarch, so to speak. And so Vera. And it was really neat to see the response from the community. And because it was a locally known and very active family, it drew a lot of local interest. You know, oftentimes we visit places far away, but we don't visit within our backyard. And so it really gave visibility to the museum for local people.
I think that's one of the exciting parts about it being a Virginia Quilt Museum, is that the community comes there who aren't even quilt makers to see what's going on.
Right.
When you do events like that, did you have little side programs that went along with it, like a class or a talk?
Oftentimes we did, and it would be maybe inviting the guest curator to do something. Sometimes it would be book signings. Sometimes it would be just a talk that would be given, or an interview, much like what we're doing type thing. So, and then sometimes there were classes, depending on the exhibit and the availability of the guest curator. Yeah.
What about the museum might people miss? You know, that they go, they see the museum, they see the exhibits, but what would you recommend that they take a look at while they're there that they might not be thinking of?
Well, the museum is fortunate in that it is housed in a very historic home, built in 1856. And so there's a lot that the architecture can offer folks. Besides looking at the quilts, there's the floor, and then just the architecture of the windows, and the age of the stairs that tells stories about who's been up and down them a million times. But so I guess the house itself is one of the things that maybe as quilters we're focused on textiles, but we might not really pay enough attention to the house, and it's got a lot to offer.
It's a pre-Civil War home, so that's always exciting to people too. There was a big change sort of in the behind the scenes that you were involved with in the documenting of the quilts while you were there. Tell me a little bit about how that sort of changed your job as a director, keeping track of things.
Those were exciting times in that up until then, we didn't have a dedicated computer for the collections room. And at that point in time, we had about 300 quilts in our collection. And so it was a real gift to be able to get a dedicated computer and also the software, Past Perfect software, that would allow us to create a database of all of our quilts based on age and maker and provenance. And we could even keep track of what was needed in order to repair, conserve, restore, whatever was needed, when it was cleaned last, when, all of those things. And it was so much easier than to find a quilt, and then also to enter a photograph so that we could not only see an accession number, we could see what it actually looked like before we took the trouble to pull it out of a box. So that was, for me, personally, that was huge. And I didn't do it all by myself, obviously. We had volunteers, but also interns were very instrumental in doing the data entry and getting that done. So really, that was one of my goals before I left, to get all of those quilts in there. And we did.
Yeah, that's a game changer for anybody to have that much inventory documented, to be able to do your job well. It's hard to imagine doing it all on paper. It's like,
all of these files, that you'd have to thumb through to find what you were looking for. So that was a really, really nice thing. It was really good.
Well, I'd love to sort of wrap it up. If you could tell me a little bit about the importance of how the museums, Virginia Quilt Museum in particular, but museums in general, interact with their community, with other museums. What is the importance of that?
Well, any small nonprofit is only going to benefit as they collaborate and find partners to work with. And sometimes these partners are smaller than they are, sometimes they're larger, but your collective power becomes enormous and your visibility is increased, your resources are exponentially increased, and so you benefit. And beyond just other nonprofits, then the business community is so important, involving them in what we're doing and how they themselves can benefit, especially downtown merchants, because we had visitors coming all the time from all over. We kept a log, and routinely every exhibit we would see visitors from almost every state, and then sometimes a number of foreign countries. So business community would also very much benefit from being aligned with us and having a presence at the museum.
I think it's something that people don't think about a whole lot when you just go see an exhibit, but I love hearing how it is we're all in it together.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, anywhere, I mean, the merchants downtown, the restaurants, and hopefully that'll all come back around, right, as we all get vaccinated. So, everyone benefits. They really do. And we're able to reach beyond just quilters then,
right,
and touch other people as well.
Thank you so much for being available to do this, to come and join us in this celebration and share a little bit about what it was like for you. Thank you so much,
it seems
Paula.
a long time ago.
I know.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it. And appreciate all your efforts in helping the museum celebrate the anniversary. So important. We're still here.
We're still here.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye. Hi, I'm Pat Sloan, and you are here for the 25th anniversary celebration of the Virginia Quilt Museum. It has been so exciting to be able to contact the directors, some of the directors that we've had over the many years of the museum. And I'm delighted that for this segment, we are going to talk with Judith Shuey, who was the director from 2010 to 2013. Hi, Judith, how are you?
I'm fine, Pat. It's nice to see you.
What part of Virginia do you live in?
I live in Stanton, which is actually about almost 30 minutes from Harrisonburg.
Okay, so that's not too, I'm a little bit further. I'm up near Washington, D.C., so Fairfax County for all the Virginia people. So one of the interesting things, Judith, when we were sort of talking about this prior, is that I wanted you to tell us a bit about what it was like to be the museum director in a pre-Civil War building house. I mean, that is such an amazing location. And I know you have such a love for that time period and knowing about the Civil War. Well, tell me a little bit about that part of the experience.
Actually, that's one of the best things about being at the Quilt Museum. The quilts are wonderful, but the house is beautiful too.
Yeah.
And I think all of us have had the experience of working in an office that had sort of gray carpet and maybe gray walls and blinds at the windows. And that's not what this is. You could step outside your office door and just look in any direction and see beautiful architecture, beautiful quilts. It's just a lovely place to work and to be.
And there's a few fun stories that go with the house as well. I'm sure you got to tell visitors about those. Like there was a jail at one point.
There was a jail when it was part of the Rockingham County court system. The house is supposed to be haunted. I never had any experiences like that, but a lot of people have. There's a room where a young soldier died after being injured in one of the battles of Winchester. So that's sort of a solemn area. And then there are beautiful long windows and a gorgeous staircase.
Yeah.
There are just lots of wonderful things about the house.
What was a fun event that you did the years while you were there?
Well, one of the most fun, we used to have teas for visitors. You bought a ticket and were entertained at a tea down on our lower level of the museum, which is also a pretty room, a sort of garden room that goes out into the yard. And the teas themselves were fun, although there were a lot of work, a lot of cooking and baking and so forth. But while I was there, I invented the character of Mrs. Warren, the Warrens were the family that built the house.
Yeah.
Mrs. Warren's nosy neighbor,
Oh,
who saw that Mrs. Warren was having guests and she had not been invited. And so she would come up with some reason to drop by and see what was going on.
oh,
She would go around and talk with the ladies at the tables and ask them about the tea and so forth, and tell a lot about the history, the true history of what was going on at that time.
did the people, the quilters that were there for the tea, or non-quilters, but were they sort of surprised when you arrived and started chatting?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I would come in just unexpected. They'd be talking and I'd come down the steps and say, yoo-hoo, Mrs. Warren, Mrs. Warren. And you all see Mrs. Warren? I don't understand why she's having company and I wasn't invited. I'm her dearest friend and neighbor and so forth. So it was fun.
Oh, that's the story. Yeah, that is what is so interesting about museums, is they're not just, the museums have other things besides just the quilts hanging or whatever the museum's theme is. There's all these other events people can participate in, and that you as a director put so much effort into developing for, camaraderie and
Right.
and learning as well.
We would have quilt turnings. We would have shows of auxiliary things like needlework that had quilt themes. All that was very interesting. We would have people come in and tell us the family story of a quilt that they had. That was always fun. So yes, a museum is really a living thing.
Yeah. And as a director, did you have, as part of what you did, to go out and give talks into communities or groups?
I did. I did a lot of talks. I went to any guild that invited me.
Yeah.
And we had quilts that traveled. They were not the finest quilts in the museum, but they were beautiful and they told stories. Okay. And we could focus on a certain historical period, like the Depression, quilts of the Depression, or quilts of the Civil War, so forth. And we could go out and tell those stories, and people could share their stories. A real popular one was crazy quilts. We had a lot of crazy quilts that we could take out. And that always brought up people's memories of their grandmothers or great-grandmother making the crazy quilt and incorporating the story of their family into that crazy quilt.
So one of the other things that I was wondering if you tell us about is we're in the museum so much over those years. Do you have a style of quilt that's a favorite that the museum has collected?
I do. My favorite style of quilt forever is 30s quilts. Yeah. I like the colors. I like the stories. I like the fact that you can almost see the love that the quilt maker is putting into that quilt, using the very little material things that she had to make something beautiful, perhaps a wedding gift or a gift for a loved one. And I just think they tell wonderful stories. And then I guess a close runner-up would be crib and baby quilts.
Oh,
because they're the same. You can just picture that mother or grandmother stitching with every stitch, putting in hopes and dreams for this baby yet to be born, perhaps. And they always tug at my heart. We still do that.
And we all still do that. Making a baby quilt is just joy. It's pure joy. Yeah. So for a visitor, do you have one tip for a visitor coming to the museum for the first time that you want to be sure that they don't miss, something that they don't miss out on?
Well, of course, the exhibits are changing. Right. I believe 3 times a year they change. So you can't see this certain exhibit because it may not be there. But the volunteer coordinator puts some time and effort into training the docents on how to answer questions. So take advantage of them. They're there for your information. Ask them any questions that you have about sources or techniques or materials or anything. They're there to help you.
So you have a favorite saying about quilts. Would you share that with us?
I do. I always say that quilts are more than fabric and thread. They are the stories of our lives. And I think we see that all the time,
Every day, Judith, right? Every day.
every day. Mhm.
This has been so fabulous to have you join us and be able to do this and share your experience. We appreciate it so much, Judith.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you.
See you later.
Bye.
Hi, I'm Pat Sloan, and this is Talks for the Virginia Quilt Museum's 25th anniversary. And I am thrilled to be chatting with different directors and board members that have been part of the Virginia Quilt Museum. And right now we have the director, who is Susie Farmer, and it is just so exciting to have you here, Susie. What an incredible job you have. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, you came into the museum in 2018. Just tell me, you have worked in other museums and done other things within that sort of structure. What is a little bit about your background?
So I have a master's degree in history and a master in gender and women's studies. And that led me into working for the National Park Service and working in museums.
Yeah.
So,
when you first came to the job, when you accepted the job and came up here, what were you excited about as far as being in a quilt museum versus the other types? Because you did a lot of outdoor stuff. So now you were going to be inside, and you and I talked about that once. This is kind of a big change for you.
yeah, I was really excited to join the Quilt Museum because I saw it as a way to expand my work with women's history and to preserve the hard work that women have done throughout the years that's often been overlooked.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of stitching going on there in that building, a lot over the time. I thought we'd first just touch on the times that we're in, because you can't ignore the fact that you have had this enormous job since early 2020 of keeping the museum running, working with the board of directors during a pandemic. And my hats off to you, Susie, because what are a few things that you have done and your team has done to keep the museum out there for everybody?
Well, this last year has definitely been a challenge for sure. But when the pandemic hit and we had to close our doors, we had to totally switch gears and start thinking of new ways to do things to keep folks involved. And so some of the things we did was we started creating virtual programming. We did virtual quilt tours. We started putting virtual exhibits of the museum up on our website. We also expanded our shop and pattern sales online. And we have continued to try to create a diverse group of programs and classes and tours to reach more people. And I think it's something we're going to continue to do even after the pandemic ends, because it's such a great outreach tool.
That it has been fantastic. I'm sure that there has been a whole group of people that have seen things in the museum that they may have not even experienced before.
Yeah, we had people contact us from Arizona. Her mother did virtual tours of the museum together on Mother's Day. We've had people from Washington take our classes.
Yes.
So it's been like Washington State, not
right.
Washington.
Yeah.
So we've really been able to reach a whole new audience with the virtual programming.
And you've also put in new exhibits while this has been going on.
Right, we have, yeah. We have continued our exhibit schedule. We had to extend some of the exhibits that we had up when we closed so that people would get a chance to see those. But we've been continuing to go with our exhibit schedule and get new things going for folks.
Yeah, I think that's just been incredible. I've loved seeing the virtual classes. I do think that is just such a great tool for in the future. Like things have changed, haven't they, Susie, where these things won't go away that you just brought in. Yeah, they're just new parts.
Right.
There's a lot of important things that go on in the museum, but then there's a lot of fun things that go on. And I know that, it's been a tough year with the pandemic, but there have been fun things. What has been something that you can tell us about that you've enjoyed doing at the museum?
Well, one of the events there's two events that we have that we really find to be a lot of fun. The stash blasts that we have are always just a good time. Seeing people come rushing in the door, or we've been holding them outside recently. So seeing people rush to the table to find the best fabric is really entertaining to watch. And hearing all these different projects that people have for the fabric that they're purchasing, that's nice. It's a nice opportunity to have a nice relaxed talk and conversation with folks that we may not have been able to have that conversation with. And another really great event that we have is our quilt evaluation days. Those are a lot of fun because you get to see all different types of quilts, and the people that come in and bring those quilts just love to learn about these quilts that have been passed down from generation to generation, and it's been a great learning experience for the staff as well. So those are two of our favorite events.
How often do you do those?
Well, before the pandemic hit, we tried to have stash blasts 3 times a year, and we're going to continue to try to do that this year. We didn't get to have as many as we wanted, but it's a great event and people really enjoy it. And we're trying to do the quilt evaluation days. Like, we'd like to have them once a month, honestly, but really every few months is when we're able to do those.
Yeah. And all of this can be found on the website on
on our events webpage. Yes.
Right. Now you as the director, you're involved with the exhibits that go up, and can you tell us a little bit about one of the exhibits that you've really loved seeing in the museum while you've been there?
That's a hard question.
I know, I hate to use the word favorite. Did you see how I went around that? Nobody said, I don't want to say my favorite.
I don't think I'm allowed to be partial as the director. But I think sometimes some of my favorite ones are the art quilt exhibits. Just because it's so amazing to see what these artists create with fabric and how they do shading. And we had Fly Me to the Moon when I was first becoming director, and I was just amazed. There was one quilt in there where they made hair, and you could see the girl's hair, and it was just really amazing the way they did that. Right now we have Her Story, which I really love because it's all about strong women who have changed changed history. So I really love that one.
And do you get involved with selecting or hanging the exhibits, or are you more the management behind the scenes?
Well, I'm also the curator as well as the director, so I get to create exhibits. The treasures from the vaults are often the exhibits I create. We had the 25th anniversary exhibit, and we created that, and I really like that because I get to research and get to tell the story of these quilts and their makers. And that's one of my favorite things to do, is find history that's been long forgotten and bring that back. And then, I also hang the exhibits. I get up on the ladders and I'm putting the quilt on the wall. And I really enjoy, it's hard work, but I really enjoy that because it's really awesome to transform the museum into something new,
It looks totally different, doesn't it? From
every time.
Yeah, every time. And if you ever have a chance, if you have a chance that you ask volunteers to come, but to see the house with nothing in it, with the exhibits down.
It's so very different.
It is really, really different. I found that really intriguing when I was there between exhibits the one time. So now there's lots of little things that go on in the museum, different things that happen. And when people are a member of the museum, they get a newsletter and it tells them about those things. But can you tell us one or two items that people may not realize are available?
So one of I think our best kept secrets is that we have programs that we can take to guilds.
Yeah.
Just a couple months ago, I presented the history of applique to a guild in Memphis via Zoom.
Oh,
You know,
now you give them not to just guilds, like if a women's group or a community group or a senior
Mhm.
center was interested.
I've worked with Parks and Rec in the past.
Yeah.
We've worked with DAR groups. So we're happy to, you don't have to be a quilter for us
Right.
to present a program to you.
Right. Oh. I am so excited to be able to talk to a group of people who are involved in some way or another from some quilts that were held and exhibited in the Virginia Quilt Museum. And this is because for the 25th anniversary, we had to talk to a group that had a quilt in the museum. And it's more fun to talk to people that we can get hold of. And they did this amazing project that is based on the Virginia state like tourism symbol motto of love. Virginia is for lovers. There are love symbols all over the state of Virginia. And now we have one done in quilts. So I have got here, let me just go through the roll call. Oh, by the way, I'm Pat Sloan. So we have Gwen Goebel, who is actually the person who was one of the instigators, maybe that's a good way to say it, Gwen, of the whole thing. And then Betty Tyree, who did all the amazing quilting on the 4 panels. And then Becky Latuca, who is the director of the Floyd, let me get this right, the Floyd Center of the Arts in Floyd, Virginia, which is now the home of these amazing quilts. Thank you, ladies, for joining me.
You're welcome.
So when, you came up with this idea or somehow this idea generated in your presence, maybe that would be a better way to say it. Can you just tell me what happened?
It was not my idea, but approximately in the spring of 2014, the then executive director, Jeff Lieberman, came into our bi-monthly quilt meeting at the Jacksonville Center, which is now the Floyd Center for the Arts, and asked if we would make four quilts. And I jumped right up, not realizing what I had done, but wanting to give back to the community. Fortunately, Sally McCauley, who is not here with us today, she immediately stood up and said she would chair this entire adventure. So that's how it started.
Now, did you have a vision for using the love when this came up?
Sally did. Sally
Okay.
already had it in her head within seconds of standing up. She
Oh.
is just it's very heady. She didn't use patterns. She didn't have anything written down.
Yeah.
She just went with it throughout the entire process.
Yeah. Becky is actually sitting in front of one of the panels. And so I'm going to ask her to move her camera a little bit so we can see the L. There it is. This is the L as it is designed and hanging there with all of your hard work and Betty's wonderful quilting on it. That was a big project to do all of those panels, Gwen. Like, how many people worked on it?
I would say about 15 without knowing exactly. We set up small committees and we would meet separately on our own rather, and then meet as workshops and meetings and teach the ones that didn't know, and everyone sort of pitched in whenever they wanted to.
Yeah, there is a lot of patchwork in there. Is it all traditional patchwork or there's some other crazy things in there?
Well, the very first Love Quilt, the very first L quilt rather, was, I did make some notes, was traditionally pieced. And that enabled a lot of our members to be an important part of this process.
Mm-hmm.
The second and third and fourth were done differently. The second was pieced by myself, which was an improvisational curved piecing technique. The third was raw edge applique by another member. Bobby Trails, and the fourth was String Piece, which is another traditional method by Sally McCauley.
How, Betty, when you started looking at these, when you started hearing about this, how was your mind spinning about how you would approach quilting it?
Truthfully, I was just kind of like, this kind of thing. But as I looked at them, I did basic swirls on the first one, and I wanted to accent the crazy piecing that is in the letters that are put up, that are quilted in. And all the letters, the L, the O, the V, and the E's are all crazy pieced.
Wow.
So, and so I wanted to accentuate those lines and accentuate the L's. Each one I decided to do as a season that I think it was, because this one was summer, and the second one, is summer, fall, and the third, because the V has the cows up on top of it. That was the applique, the raw edge applique, kind of the shadow applique. And it had kind of like, looks like snow on it.
Yeah.
And so I made that winter.
Yeah.
And that's how the seasons came about. And then the fourth one would then be spring.
Yeah.
And so I quilted the backgrounds with that kind of a theme. And then I did all the letters the same way.
Yeah. So Gwen, when your team, this whole team, not just your team, but the team that worked on these, when you started, about how long did it take to do the 4 panels until you could get them to Betty to quilt?
I don't remember exactly, but again, we were approached by Jeff in the spring of 2014, and I believe we presented the 4 quilts, finished, bound, quilted, everything in the summer, August, I believe it was, of 2015. So we worked fairly quickly to do 4 quilts.
Yeah.
But again, there were quite a few of us, and we gave as many members the opportunity to participate depending upon their skill level.
Right. Wow. So when these toured a little bit, so one of the places was the Virginia Quilt Museum, where it hung in the exhibit area. When did that happen?
I believe that was November of 2016.
2016. Yeah, I think so. So if anybody was seeing it, raise your hand, you know, this, because that's great. I missed it. I was on travel and I didn't get to even know about it till afterwards. I was like, darn. So I still now have to go down to Floyd to visit Becky and see it in her area. So Betty, when you got the quilts, to do the quilting on them, did you have a deadline that you set for yourself, or did anybody give you one? Because, you know, it's
no, they just gave them to me and said they needed them yesterday.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. And so I worked pretty continuously on them and, you know, rolled them out as soon as I could, you know. And once I get the idea and get the feel of it, it goes quicker. The first one always takes me a little bit longer because I'm like trying to feel it out and feel, you know, what is going to be done with them.
Yeah. Did you put anything hidden in there, Betty? Any of the quilting?
Yeah. At each of the seasons and each of the backgrounds, like the summer or the spring has, you can find bees in there and all different kinds of flowers and butterflies. I believe the O is, it's fall. And so I have all kinds of leaves. I have maple leaves. I have sycamore leaves. I have all kinds of leaves that are around Virginia, and some swirls, you know, looks like the wind blowing. And the V, I guess, is the snow. And in the applique, I tried to go in and enhance, like when they had the grassy areas, I tried to, you know, show the grass, and then I tried to show the depth of the paths going back, and the cows, and outline around the cows in the snowy seasons. So that was just, you know, just kind of enhance their beautiful workmanship.
Gwen, when this was going on, was there anything do you have like any little story that happened about the making of it? I know you had some big group events where you all got together and sewed for, you know, a day or something, but there's anything behind the scenes you can tell us?
Nothing comes to my mind other than the camaraderie, I guess the correct word is, of having people that, again, didn't really know how to crazy quilt, which was what the red fabrics that were all donated, by the way, from members of the Guild. It just, everybody helped each other. People came and all they did some days was iron,
Yeah.
but that's what made them work. That's what made them get finished. And Sally, again, was instrumental, along with Betty, in my opinion,
Yeah.
of these quilts becoming such artistic forms, because Sally's perseverance and her leadership skills, she was very organized, and she just boom, 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 kept us on track in every way. And Betty's, if you haven't seen the quilts, Betty's quilting is just over the top. And I've been quilting a long time, and it is gorgeous, every single stitch of it.
Yeah. I'm going to get Becky to come in here now and unmute herself so that we can chat with her about where they're hanging now. So Becky, how long have you been with the Arts Center?
So I started here in October of 2017, so about 3.5 years now.
Yeah. So where are these exhibited in the Arts Center?
So I'm standing in the community room of the Arts Center. If you've ever visited, we're housed in a renovated dairy barn, and the entire upstairs, well, the upstairs is divided into an art gallery and a community room. And so I'm in the community room now, and I have the Love Quilts behind me, and I can do a quick scan with the laptop from where I'm standing. I don't know, you won't get to see detail, but you'll get to see them. And directly across from me, there are additional quilts on display from the Floyd Quilt Guild. They come in and they change out the quilts once a year so that we have something different on display. But I'm just going to move the laptop around and hope not to disconnect while doing it.
This is the exciting part, to see them hanging. Oh, look at that. How amazing. So Gwen, has it been a little while since you've seen them in person?
Yes, I haven't been home for about 1.5 years.
Yeah. Becky, that is awesome.
Yeah, and from where I'm standing, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to catch the E, but you can get a sense, although as already mentioned, Betty's quilting is amazing and they're worth a very close-up look. Absolutely.
Thank you.
So
They're fun. It's fun. I always think it's fun to hide things. I think it was Roberta Horton one time said that if you hide things, it makes people keep looking. You want to put something in your quilts that make people keep looking at them. Yeah. And whether it be in the piecing or in the fabric or in the quilting.
Now that I've learned about it, I'm going to be spending a lot of time looking for those hidden items too. So
well, this has been absolutely wonderful to have all of you here able to chat about one of these extraordinary quilts that have visited the Virginia Quilt Museum. And I invite everybody watching to go down to the Floyd Center in Floyd, Virginia, and see them for yourself and say hi to Becky while you're there. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Pat. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
thanks, Pat. Nice to see everyone.
Bye.
Talk about, what do you feel is the importance of a quilt museum? Because you have worked in other museums, and this is such a unique little slice of museum world.
Well, quilt museums are important for many reasons. First, I think they preserve the history of women's work, which has often been overlooked and underappreciated. Making quilts was and still is hard work, and the women that made the quilts back in the 1800s had very different conditions and resources compared to today's quilters. And these quilts were made out of love, and they were made to take care of families, and they were made to keep them warm and to give something beautiful to their family in the process. And so those quilts contain memories and stories from long ago. And so I think they're really worth protecting and preserving. They also allowed women to express themselves in a time when women's voices and ideas were less valued than they are now. And for the more modern quilts we preserve, all of these values still apply. These quilts are still made to allow the maker to express themselves, to create something of value and memory and love. And while the techniques have evolved over time, the reasons for making them and the love and the creative outlets, they've all stayed the same. So I think that's one of the reasons that quilt museums are very important is because they get to tell those stories.
I just think it's so amazing that we have this in Virginia and available now to everybody in the world to just come and visit. And one day their doors will be open again all the time and they can come inside. But in the meantime, people can be involved in a couple of ways. Can you just wrap up and tell us how they can join and be part of the museum?
Well, if you visit our website, vaquiltmuseum.org, you can become a member. And there's all kinds of special benefits for being a member, including, you don't have to pay when you come to visit the museum. You get that newsletter, which features the quilt of the month. So every month you get to see a new quilt from our collection. You can volunteer. We have tons of opportunities. You don't even have to leave your area to be a volunteer for us. We have a great program where one of our volunteers is creating or has created programs to take to the schools.
Oh,
Because kids aren't really getting to go on field trips as much anymore.
yes.
So we take the quilts and the history to them.
Mm.
And you could do that if you like to work with kids, or if you want to do research,
Mhm.
you can do that from your home. We have community ambassadors who work within their communities to share the story or to share information about the Quilt Museum. And we'll send you a nice pack of rack cards to put out at all the tourism spots in your town. So, there's a volunteer page on our website that has all the information if you're interested in becoming a volunteer. And we love our volunteers. We couldn't do what we do without them.
Yeah, everybody should check that out. And I want to thank you, Susie, for being here and for directing the museum through all of this and continuing on past into the next phases. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining me to celebrate your museum's 25th anniversary.
Right. And here's to 25 more years. So.
That's right. Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.